We're going to start the live stream as soon as Bartram gives me the signal. We're looking good. Welcome, everybody, to Welcome Change Law in Our Hands. We're so excited to have you. It's a wonderful evening. We're really excited to kick off something really special with you all tonight. And to help us kick us off, I'm going to ask Ashoka Fellow, co-founder and CEO of Embark, Imran Khan, to come welcome us.
Hello, everybody. Please make yourself comfortable. There's some seats here. Welcome to my hometown of Chicago, everybody. Welcome to all the viewers that are here with us on the live stream from all across the country. My name is Imran Khan. I'm honored to have received an Ashoka Fellowship for leading a movement here in the city of Chicago, for making Chicago one of the most unified cities by making its education system one of the most experiential. In the last 10 years, I've been working as a teacher and then leading a nonprofit, and I've come to recognize that a lack of access to experiences and isolation is one of the greatest challenges that our students are facing. In fact, is one of the main reasons that our students are having such terrible outcomes in so many situations. But you know what? I've also come to recognize that the distances between us are actually one of the greatest challenges that all of us are facing. That, in fact, it's the reason that we think about ourselves in certain ways, that we look at others in certain ways, that we think about the challenges and the problems that we are facing in our society, the reasons that those are happening, and then the way we see our solutions and the actions that we can take, all are shaped by the distances and the understanding that we have of one another. And so one of the greatest benefits that I got as being an Ashoka Fellow was that I had the opportunity to close those distances and to be around these amazing folks who are creating systems change, who are changing outcomes every single day and fighting solutions that are some of the most intractable that we are facing in our country. And today, I get to welcome all of you and our Ashoka Fellows to share in some of those solutions, to share in some of those conversations, to share in some of those strategies. And today, we're going to hear about the future of our justice system. We're going to hear about some of the challenges we're facing, but we're also going to hear, really importantly, about what we have to be hopeful for, about the solutions that are happening right now, today. And ladies and gentlemen, this is the beginning of a series of conversations because Ashoka is kicking off a national tour of solutions called Welcome Change. And it's a tour that we need today more than any other tour. A tour of solutions, a tour of hope, a tour of vision for our country. And so there's so much more to come, but I want to begin by inviting the host of tonight's panel up, Director of Strategy and Partnerships for Ashoka USA, Michael Zakaris. Thank you.
We'll just go ahead and make ourselves comfortable up here. Imran, where did he go? Oh, there he is. Thank you so much. Kind welcome. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, the Ace Hotel, for having us. It's a privilege to host this conversation, and it's exciting because it is the first in the series, the inaugural Welcome Change. As Imran said, we'll have five such conversations over the course of the next month that bring together 20 social entrepreneurs to talk about everything from rural innovation, to climate change, to racial healing. My name is Michael Zakaris. I'm the Director of Partnerships at Ashoka here in the US. I've been at Ashoka more than a decade. And it's most of the reason is because I think there's really no more authentic community of people taking aim at systemic problems and injustice anywhere in the world. And those of us who work at Ashoka have the privilege of working alongside the fellows and supporting them in a number of ways, connecting them to the people and the ideas and the resources that can help them go further, faster. And of course, all along the way, we're constantly learning from them about how transformative change happens. The conversation today is about the intersection of the law and social change. And I think it's an appropriate kicking off point for the series because in many respects, the law is about power. It's about who has power and on whose behalf we wield that power. And we'll get into this in the discussion, but I think it's worth highlighting as sort of a framing point because I think that too many in the field of social entrepreneurship and frankly in philanthropy as well are uncomfortable talking about power, about the vast power imbalances that we have in this country that perpetuate many of the problems that we see and feel. I'm glad that we are comfortable talking about it. In fact, we think that for social entrepreneurship to reach its full potential, we need to look past just the sort of tactics and look past the win-wins that we sometimes become enamored with and really get to the heart of matters. Finally, I'm not a lawyer, and that shouldn't matter for this conversation. We are committed to making this resonate past the legal jargon, and so we'll do our best there. And yeah, we can kick it off. So you all up here are fairly new to those in the room. So before we get into the sort of larger parts of the conversation, I'd love for you all to introduce yourselves. And what I'm thinking is letting us know here's what I do, and then filling that in with a little bit of context of why I'm doing it, or what is motivating me, what is driving me in this work that I'm committing myself to. So, Katie, we can start with you.
Yeah? Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Katie Redford, and I run an organization called Earth Rights International. Our mission is to combine the power of law and the power of people in defense of human rights and the environment. So we go right at that power thing, Michael, with no shame. And basically, what do? I sue corporations. We live in a world, as I see it, where corporations have an unbelievable amount of power, and corporate rights trump human rights and community rights and the rights of the environment almost every single time, and that's what we're trying to change. And why I do it? Well, I can tell you sort of our origin story, which still drives me every day. I was, as a law student, very starry-eyed about justice and fairness and truth and the rule of law and all of that crap that they teach you in law school. And then you go there and it's like it's about winning and money and, and power. And I was working for a human rights organization as an intern in the jungle of Burma and meeting with and interviewing and documenting horrific stories of human rights abuses, victims, survivors, and witnesses of human rights abuses at the hands of the Burmese military. And I was talking, and this was in the 90s, Burma was ruled by one of the most notorious military pariah regimes with a terrible record of human rights abuses, crimes against humanity, slave labor. And I was talking to one of the villagers who said, who was talking about this terrible project that was being constructed by a US oil company, a pipeline project going through Burma, and the US oil company had actually gone into a contractual relationship and hired the Burmese military to provide quote unquote security for their project. And in carrying out their duties, that military forcefully relocated villages, forced thousands of people to work as slaves building the infrastructure for this American oil company's pipeline, displaced thousands, the military raped women, countless abuses. And the villager said, we've written letters to your American oil company, And we've written letters to the President of the United States and to the World Bank, begging them to stop financing this project that is killing our people. And we've gotten no response. So we ask you, as a law student, would it be illegal for us to blow the pipeline up? And of course I was like, well, they haven't taught us that yet in law school. I'm only a second year. But it was this moment of these people who were doing nothing but living their lives, and uninvited, this corporation shows up just because they live on natural resources and wreck everything. And what they have in their toolbox is writing letters and blowing stuff up. And I thought, well, I'm a law student. You can sue. And so that was the beginning of Earth Rights, and we did sue, and we won, and we made legal history by becoming the first, by bringing the first case in which a US corporation was held accountable for human rights abuses committed overseas. But the important piece of why that drives me is to talk about how powerful law can be when it is serving real people, real communities, and folks who are using it for good as opposed to greed and exploitation and extraction. So that's why I do what we do, what I do, and that's really guides everything that Earth Rights does.
Thanks for letting me follow that. So low expectations for me. My name is Lam Ho, and I am the founder and executive director of a Chicago-based organization. So let's go Chicago, called the Community Activism Law Alliance, or CALA for short. And what we're doing is trying to transform legal aid into something that is community-located, community-owned and operated, and most importantly, community-controlled. And how we do that is we partner with activist organizations, particularly in underserved communities, and create programs. We're up to, I think, about 17 programs. So there are 17 programs that are located in neighborhoods in Chicago and also in Lake County, which are, everything happens in community spaces. From the moment that you come in to talk about your case, to preparing for trial, to doing deposition, it's all in community spaces. All of it is run by our community partners. So we send our lawyers, but the reception, the language support, the administration, that's done and owned by our community partners because they make all the decisions. Everything from who gets services, what areas of law we practice, the hours of operation. So you can imagine we work evenings and weekends because that's when people want to see their lawyers. But even litigation strategy. So a lot of the work that we do is tied to community activism and organizing campaigns. So the litigation strategy is often directed by our community partners. So this goes to the heart of the power of the law. I mean, Katie has really demonstrated just how powerful the law is, but why should that power be controlled by lawyers? It should be controlled by the people who are most directly impacted and frankly know what needs to be done. And that's sort of my origin story. So I've been a legal aid lawyer my entire career. And so when I first came to Chicago, I worked on the west side of Chicago. And for those of you who are familiar with Chicago, North Lawndale, Little Village, Garfield Park, Austin, I worked in those neighborhoods. And I did great work. I'm very proud of the time that I spent in those neighborhoods doing great work. But I also saw that this vision that I think all of us are going to speak to about how law as a tool of transformation and social change, that's why I went to law school. And as great as the work that I was doing, all these individual cases and the work that I was doing didn't actually meet that vision. I wasn't actually creating change. And more importantly, I was reifying the system where all the power was actually in the hands of government and lawyers. And things that really that I really want to sort of speak to is think about what's going on in our country today and think about the fact that a majority of legal aid funding in this country is controlled by the government through a system called the Legal Services Corporation. There are now over approximately 30 restrictions that if you receive government funding, not even funding that you receive from other sources, but if you receive government funding, you can't represent undocumented immigrants. It's 2018, you can't do any school desegregation cases. You can't represent any prisoners. And I can go on for, you can't support organizing. You can't do abortion cases. This is 2018, and the government tells lawyers, you can't do this. So the law is not an instrument of social change and when you can only do individual cases, and it's not tied to organizing. It's not tied to social movements. And instead, it's tied to individual cases with lawyers downtown who have no connection to the communities that are facing the injustices. So I started Kala because I couldn't do what I believe the law can be. Oh, actually, no problem. Yeah, it's mine. It's mine.
I'm next.
Rachel.
All right. I'm Rachel Armstrong. I'm the founder and executive director of an organization called Farm Commons. It is good to meet you all. I do paperwork. No, it is much more interesting than that. So we actually empower the United States small farmers and small business owners to lead the drafting of their own business documentation. Things like sales contracts, employee manuals. It sounds boring, but it's actually really exciting because by doing that, we put the power back in the hands of small business owners to create the solutions that matter to them in their communities and in concert with their values. So my life has been lived in farming, food system development, and rural communities. One day I get a call. I get a call from a farmer. He has been saving up money, raising capital to buy his own farm by growing seed garlic. So seed garlic goes in the ground in the fall. He gets a call from the landowner on whose land this garlic is in the winter saying, I'm not going to renew that lease, and you don't have access to the land in the spring. He panics. He calls me. Is this fair? Could this happen? What can I do? And I'm an innocent, bystander. I don't have a law degree, but I'm like, I'll look it up. We'll find an answer. I'm assuming that there's going to be a law somewhere that says what's fair in a situation like this. Well, to my surprise, I find that the first authority for what is fair between a farmer, a landowner, or any two contracting parties to a lease are those individuals. It's not the law. It's not some anonymous law in a book. It's the relationship. Well, that was kind of crushing to the farmer because do you think that they talked about that issue beforehand or came to an agreement? They didn't. And so they had nothing. And he did have to go to some law in some book somewhere that says what you do if you didn't talk about it. So it was a crushing realization for him, but I saw some light there. I saw that the farming community that I knew and loved had power available to it that we were not taking. That we could use that power to define the relationships that we wanted, that we could create lease agreements that worked for us, that represented our solutions and our values. So that's what Farm Commons does. We help communities create those solutions. We do that through education and by creating community leaders that understand what the law is in their community and the potential that it has to serve social justice values, to live out their values of sustainability, of economic prosperity in rural areas, and for farmers in urban areas too. So we're proving the model in the community in which I'm most familiar, but it has potential for many communities across the United States.
Great. Thank you. So the title of the conversation is The Law in Your Hands, and of course you guys have already touched on this a little bit, but I'd like to go a little bit deeper. What does that really mean exactly, and why does it matter? I mean, this idea of sort of democratizing access or ownership somehow of the law. And again, Katie, you're welcome to kick it off, but anyone can take this. But help us understand sort of what that's, this is a common thread across all three of your work. It's not just necessarily making the law work on behalf of someone else, but it's actually kind of handing over some of the reins. Why should we care about that?
Well, I think, given that we're talking about power here, right, and who has the power, and then who has the ability to exercise it, and certainly both of you have really made clear that that by putting the power of the law into the hands of the people who are most impacted by either the victory or the loss, that actually is the way that you democratize law and the way that you make the biggest impact. And we certainly believe that at Earthrights as well. And so in all of our litigation, and by the way, it's not just oil companies, guys. We've got cases against mining companies, against Chiquita, against the World Bank. It is really any kind of corporate or financial powerful institution that is based, whose business model is based on extraction and exploitation of resources. And we deal with situations where you've got these incredibly powerful institutions who want something that's on the land or near the land or underneath the land of communities who live there. And so what needs to happen is those communities need to have tools to either negotiate or engage or make better deals for themselves or say no if that's what they want. And then if their rights are violated, to have strategies to hold these bad actors and these violators accountable. And really, all we do as lawyers is find out what happened to these communities, which we call, the fancy word for that is evidence gathering, right? Documentation. We get evidence of the harms, of the abuses. We put them into legal briefs, so we describe them as legal violations, and we tell a story to a court who has the ability to give a remedy and to provide justice, either in the form of, forcing the company to pay, forcing them to stop their bad practices, forcing them to get off the land and go away, whatever that is. But actually, it's not us as lawyers who have that power. I could be the greatest lawyer in the world, and if I walk into court complaining about general legal violations without a client who has a story, I got nothing. Okay? What is powerful is the clients and the survivors of these abuses walking into court telling their own stories in their words, facing that company or that bank that harmed them and demanding justice. And so at the end of the day, whether we win or lose the case, you can't take that power away from those communities. I'll never forget, and I'll close with this, we were talking about this today, like what is justice in this crazy world that we live in today? What is winning? What is victory? When we lost our first case on behalf of, we had won cases before that, but then the first case that we did lose, which was a crushing blow, on behalf of villagers from Nigeria who had family members killed by what was known as the Kill and Go police in Nigeria, who were working for Chevron. And we went into a courtroom and we went to trial and we lost this case, and we as lawyers were just devastated, like, oh my God, we lost, Chevron won. And our Nigerian clients said, are you kidding? We didn't lose. We got to go into court, tell our stories, say what happened. Chevron was sitting there. They had to get lawyers. They had to listen to us. They couldn't run away like they can in our country. Your courts and judges listened, and we told our story. That we could never, ever lose when we get that power. So that, to me, is what it's about. It's like, yeah, we open the doors and find the right forum for them to do their best work.
So I guess I'm next. So I think one of the what Katie says resonates so much with me, and I think a common theme will be a lot of the things that we each say will really apply to all of our work. But what Katie really started off and triggered me to think about is the community power. Today we're talking about putting the power of the law into the hands of people and communities. But I think a really important part of the discussion is that there's power already in these communities. And the reason that I think it's so critical to put the power of the law into the hands of the community is it combines the law and the power of the law into all the power that the community already has through its own organizing, through its own activism. And I want to sort of speak about sort of the typical legal process and how that legal process creates a silo that causes a disconnection between community activism and organizing and that power versus the power of the law. So when you think of a sort of a traditional legal process, it's a client who needs help, goes to a downtown office, speaks to a lawyer who's in charge, and the person, if they're going to a legal aid organization, will get help if it's allowed by the government funding restrictions, or even if they're not receiving government funding, they'll receive help from the attorney if their case fits the priority of the organization. The legal organization, lawyers set those priorities. And then the lawyer works on that case, they go into the courtroom, and hopefully they win and they've saved the day. That's sort of a way of thinking about law in a traditional way. What happens with that is, one, what happens to all the organizing that's going on? In the current climate, we know that immigrants are going to struggle in courts because the immigration law is terrible. I do a lot of work with undocumented immigrants. It's about 60 to 70% of our work. And the law is terrible. We're not going to win using the law only. And in that traditional process, the lawyer is disconnected and siloed away from the organizing that actually is creating the change to immigration law. It's the organizing that is going to change how individuals view sex workers. That power of the community is something that can only be leveraged if it's tied to and works with what the law can achieve. And quickly talk about a couple of examples actually just one example, which is in the immigration space right now, deportation is at a massive high. We can't win half the cases because the laws are so terrible. And we actually had a case where the community member we were working with was on a plane to Mexico by the time we figured out what was going on with the case. There's no law, there's no court, there's no judge that was going to be able to help us achieve the result that's needed. But we actually worked with some community activists and organizers. We basically staged the legal equivalent of a temper tantrum at the office of ICE here in Chicago. And through making legal arguments, but more importantly, using pretty much guerrilla temper tantrum tactics, we actually stopped that deportation in the air. We got ICE to land the plane in Texas and bring the person back. And that power is only possible because we didn't think the law was the only way we could handle the situation.
Sometimes.
Yeah, great. Otherwise, I
Yeah,
can ask another question.
absolutely. Sometimes I listen to Lam and I think, yeah. So Farm Commons is like that, but for farmers, small business owners, and paperwork. So Lam and I both know, and Katie too, that democratizing the law means applying one of the central tenets of social change. Those most affected by the problem are the ones who should define the solution. That applies to all areas of law, whether it's legal aid or suing corporations or drafting paperwork and writing business documentation. Those affected by the problems deserve to create the solutions, and that's the only way we'll create stable, resilient farm businesses and small businesses across the United States. But what does that mean? So someone needs a lease. Normally they might go to an attorney and say, I need a lease. The attorney's like, I've drafted one of those before, let me get you one. You know, you pay some money, you have a little conversation, you get a lease. Most of the time you don't know what it says. You don't know what it means. It's but it's clearly good boilerplate. You paid for it. That's not enough. That's not enough. We have challenging problems that small business owners need resolution to. So let's take the case of a sustainable farm that's using cover cropping. So that means planting a crop over the winter to keep the soil in place. Who pays for the costs of that? That keeps the soil fertility high. It preserves the land value. Shouldn't the landowner bear some, share of that cost? What's fair? I'm an attorney. I do come from farming, but I don't know what's fair. There's two people that know what's fair, and it's the farmer and the landowner. We need to create an environment for them to be able to talk that out themselves. That's what's going to be fair. And to use another example, sexual harassment happens on farms. And it's especially problematic in a small business environment because if the boss is the one doing the harassing, who do you report it to? How do you get justice in that kind of an environment? Farmers are concerned about this. They want legitimate, authentic ways to resolve harassment claims that happen in their communities. And they need help. They can't come to an attorney. I don't know how to create a fair system, but they do. So we create that environment to have those hard conversations and create real solutions that matter to people in these communities. We like to think paperwork can be revolutionary.
As we all know these days more than ever, right? Democracy is messy, and so I'm just curious as we move towards sort of putting the law in more people's hands, or towards what looks like more democratic ownership of the law. What are some of the challenges? I mean, we had talked about this a little bit before this conversation now, and you guys, talked about the sort of scale of efficiency versus sort of, kind of openness and accountability. So I'm curious, as you've now been in this work, what have been some of the stumbling blocks, if any, around opening it up?
Am I first again?
No. Well, you can go first, but.
I can lead on that one if it's okay.
Yeah, you go.
Yeah.
Who wants to go first on the problems?
Right, exactly. Oh, there are many. So I believe strongly in the community that I serve. I believe that with a small amount of education and a bit of leadership development, these communities can define good solutions for themselves. But legal education can be very challenging. The law is nuanced, and there are subtleties. And when you go into communities and provide that education in an enriching adult environment, which means we have some activities and we try to create this make it interesting. This isn't law school. Well, sometimes you got to sacrifice a little bit of the rigor or the accuracy, and misimpressions might be created. And we attorney types are risk adverse. We don't want that to happen. How do we stop that? How do we control everything to make sure that the knowledge transfer is perfect? And that's not authentic. That's not empowering communities. So how do we mitigate some of that misinformation that might happen, or some of the community might draft a legal document that's missing provisions that I as an attorney would want to include? Do I demand they do it? So it isn't immune from some issues that come up because we attorney types like control, and we see the value of it, and we have to release some of that control.
So actually, I sort of want to speak to what you're saying, but also ask you a question from it. So what Rachel's speaking about, we certainly experience, because especially working with organizers and activists, lawyers are very linear. We're very deadline driven. We're very, as Rachel pointed out, accuracy and detail. That's not organizing. That's not activism. So there have been so many occasions where what we expected was going to happen, it was a shit show. It was nothing like what was planned. And we're at risk for missing a deadline for filing a brief, or getting yelled at by the court because we didn't do what we were supposed to do, because our community partner was more focused on something completely different than the lawsuit. However, and the question I have for you, Rachel, and also for Katie, is, in some ways, don't you think that is actually such a unique learning experience that all lawyers should have in negotiating and learning how to work with communities, you have to really force yourself to unlearn what law schools taught you, unlearn this focus on linearity and efficiency that we think is important, but in fact may actually be a hindrance to social change.
So yes. I mean, one of the things about working with clients is that they're human. And humans aren't always perfect. And at the same time, we do work in, a system of justice that has an imperfect solution for, and imperfect remedies for the harms that we're dealing with. So at the end of the day, if we win a lawsuit where we represent people who have survived rape, torture, crimes against humanity, forced labor, killing, if we win, we get damages. That's money. And money doesn't bring back your dead children or restore your dignity or bring you back your freedom that you lost when you were working for this American oil company, for example. And I'll never forget, so damages, that word, it highlights, what we get when we win. But I'll never forget. I mean, sometimes your clients do things and you're like, what are they doing? What did they just say to the media? Who are they? What? Like they go rogue on you sometimes. And one time I was venting to an older, more experienced lawyer, and I was like, God, why are all of our clients like, what are they doing? And he was like, Katie, do you understand that they are damaged? They wouldn't be our clients if they weren't, by definition. And especially our clients, we do human rights cases, they have suffered unspeakable abuses. And so, yeah, are they gonna always do everything that you would do? No, and that is a challenge, and they don't teach you how to deal with that in law school, for sure. I mean, we all, I think, on this panel learned how to be the lawyers that we are not at law school or in the classroom. We learned it on the fly, which is great news. You don't have to go to law school to to do what we do. And then the other thing I'll say, and we can maybe go into this more in the future, but we're talking about community lawyering, movement lawyering, where yes, we represent clients, and that's our duty as lawyers, but all of us know, and our clients believe, that their case is bigger than just what happened to them. It's about system change. So our lawsuit on behalf of people from Burma was not just about getting these clients remedies. It was about making sure that corporations knew that they were on the hook for human rights abuses, that there would be a deterrent effect in the future, because if you seek to benefit from these abuses, you could be sued and held accountable. But then the flip side of that is that all of a sudden, the global anti-globalization movement thinks of your case as their case, or the Free Burma movement, or the Free Ken Saro-Wiwa movement in one of our other cases in Nigeria. And when it comes time to make decisions about your case, you have to consider your clients, not what's good for the movement, not what's going to be the best headline, or maybe get their shareholders to do something, but what is in the best interest of our client. And so it is difficult to balance the interests of your client, the interests of the movement. Maybe your client is part of a community that the client doesn't care about the community. They want to deal with their own stuff, and we have to navigate these things, and those are really, really difficult.
I've got a couple more questions. Lam, can you move forward a little bit? I'm craning my neck to see you. No, it's fine. A couple more questions, but I know you all have at least one question for each other. So, Lam, did you want to kick it off? And I forget who you're asking a question to, but the surprise question.
We didn't plan this at all.
So my question is for Katie. We work domestically. So as someone who works on a really global context, what's the sort of pressing issue that really keeps you up awake at night these days?
Climate change. I will quote Bishop Tutu in saying that climate change is the biggest threat to global human rights of our time. And that and wherever you live, if you live on this planet, then your rights, your futures, and your livelihoods are impacted right now and will be impacted by climate change. And in case any of you guys are wondering what this sling that I'm wearing is, it's not just for sympathy. But Earth Rights is actually, believe it or not, suing oil companies for climate change. And we have recently brought our first case, actually, on behalf of United States communities. We represent the city of Boulder in Colorado, Boulder County, and San Miguel County, that are communities that have been devastatingly impacted by climate change in the form of wildfires, droughts, flooding, loss of snowpack, just it goes on. And so we've sued ExxonMobil and Suncor, two of the world's biggest fossil fuel companies, for their contribution to global climate change, which is causing the impacts in Colorado. So, you know, I visit my clients in the jungles of Burma and war zones and the deep, darkest Amazon. Nothing's ever happened to me. And I'm visiting my clients in Boulder 2 weeks ago, and I went skiing and this. so that's my story. It's a dangerous job, but truly, I mean, if we don't win on climate change, in my opinion, nothing else matters, because we have one planet to live on, and it is in trouble, people. So that is what keeps me up, and the good news is that we can sue someone for it, and even more importantly, there is something that every single person can do and must do, because it's going to take organizing, it's going to take policy advocacy, it's going to take training, education, movement building, lawyering, funding, philanthropy, all of it. So that's what keeps me up at night.
Sounds like a lot of lost sleep to me.
No. We have lots of friends.
And you had a question for someone, Katie?
I do. So Rachel, as someone who is working with businesses and farmers and seeing them as the same team, that is really exciting to me, because it doesn't always happen with my farmers and businesses that I'm dealing with. So, and I'm also excited by something that you said, which is that your model and your strategy is, you're using it in this one context now, but it's replicable and adaptable and can be scaled to lots of other situations. So what's next, and where are the fertile grounds for you?
Right. My work feels so indulgent next to yours. I work with these happy, beautiful small businesses across America that are, you know, fulfilling their heritage, their heart's desire through farming and through other small businesses. And it warms my heart, and I'm so glad you are doing what you are doing. But,
right back at you, sister.
Yeah. But to answer your question, farming does have my heart and soul, but I am really excited for what the model could mean for other sectors, other industries. We do believe that all communities deserve to control, deserve to lead business law by and for themselves. We think that there are a number of communities that could really benefit from our approach of empowering people to live out their values and create community-based solutions. We think one of the top prospects that we have in mind is immigrant-owned entrepreneurial communities. They're very analogous to farming in that they can be quite insular communities with their own creativity, their own cultures and conventions, and that means they have their own unique solutions that we as attorneys need to listen to and need to foster, so that we can see what emerges from that and let other communities learn from those solutions and iterate across them. So it's going to be really exciting when we get to see what farmers come up with to solve vexing business problems that they have, and then compare that to, well, even within farming, we have in Minnesota, Hmong and Somali farming communities, which will come up with other solutions. Then what other immigrant-owned entrepreneurial communities are in America that many of them, you know, don't use attorneys right now at the rate that they could. that's an opportunity that's really right for our model. Our model is really easy to adopt where there isn't already a standard practice of going to an attorney. So we're looking forward to finding those communities and seeing what sort of wisdom comes up from those communities. Lam, that's kind of a question I have for you, too. You and I both learn a lot from the communities that we serve. And what I really love about your model is you're so deeply embedded in that community that I imagine that learning must happen on a daily basis. We don't quite get that level of engagement with folks. So tell me, what are some of the things that you learn? What are some of the insights that you gain from the communities that you serve?
So I think at a very basic level, I mean, we owe everything to our community partners. Like the 17 programs that we operate, none of it can exist without our community partners because it's their spaces. They man the reception desk. They schedule the appointments. They do the outreach. So at a very basic level, our entire operations is entirely contingent upon our community partners. But what we learn is how to create social change. I think that the reason we operate within communities is to leverage what they're already doing, and they have a better understanding of how change can be created. And I think about, on a very sort of basic level, legal education, lawyers operate in a space that's not about radical transformation. That's not how, for the most of us, how the law works. The law is a very gradual process. It's based upon a system of precedents. Every day, our attorneys, and I think this is something that's so critical to power, is that it's a relationship. We are learning and we teach simultaneously. And what our attorneys are learning on a daily basis is things can be done differently. These structures and systems that exist, why we don't need 11 white people who don't live in Little Village, who are not undocumented immigrants, who aren't sex workers, to tell us this is how the world is going to change. So that's a very big, nice concept. But like at a very basic level, I also just learned that, like the case that I mentioned regarding the deportation in the air, but we have so many cases because the litigation strategy is decided by our community partner. They will say, yes, you may think as a lawyer this is how you're going to win the legal case, but the goal is not the legal case. And our lawyers are learning that the strategies for actually creating the end goal, which is community change, which is social change, is done through different means. So we do a lot of work on anti-displacement and anti-gentrification. We had what I thought was an absolute amazing settlement. And my absolute recommendation as a lawyer was we should not go to trial, because if we go to trial, you're going to lose, or you're not going to get as much. You can't possibly get as much as what they're offering. They didn't care, because what they wanted was to be able to get into the press what's going on in these neighborhoods. They wanted the people to be able to return to their homes, because the law doesn't allow for an eviction in Chicago for people who don't have leases to actually stay in their properties. Our tenant organizer says, we're going to go to trial, because it's more important for us to speak about the issue, to speak about the systematic problem and to get exposure, than to simply win lots of money. But what was actually amazing, and we now do it, is we proceeded to trial. A few days before trial, the other side completely capitulated. And so we actually ended up getting everything that they wanted and more, and they actually ended up getting double the money that I thought was the maximum that could be achieved at trial. So, we're learning social change. We're also learning how to be better lawyers too.
So I'm going to open it up to questions from you all in just one. So I want to close with one question, just a one-sentence answer from each of you. So one of the things that we we sort of joke that Ashoka Fellows are like real life fortune tellers, because you guys are helping us all see 5 and 10 years into the future, right? The way the world is going, and you're building the pathways to get us there. So if we had this conversation again in 10 years, like what is the 1 or 2 sentence, like what do you want to see? What looks different?
I can go first. So what I would like to see in 10 years is that instead of this network of legal aid organizations that are controlled by governments funding or by lawyers, instead we have this radical network that is community owned, community operated, and community directed across the country.
Are we saying what we think the world is going to look like, or we want it to look like?
Mine was the ideal.
Okay. I'm doing
in case it wasn't
that.
obvious.
I guess
I'm
fortune
following.
tellers tell you
Fortune
what's
tell.
going
All right,
on,
no,
so
be the change. Okay.
we want to end on
So
a positive note
yes,
there, so.
okay. So the world in 10 years is that our laws, our constitutions, and our international policy and legal documents protect human rights and planetary rights over corporate rights. And we have reversed the trend whereby corporations have hijacked government and all of our systems and structures of power, and people have taken it back.
Okay.
Definitely going to be that way.
So after Katie breaks down the corporations, then we got a nation of small business owners. It is going to be awesome. Yes, they are going to be stable. They are going to be resilient. They are going to have authentic solutions to their problems and relationships that keep them strong in their communities, promoting economic development and opportunity for young people to live in the community of their choice.
Hear, hear. Okay. That sounds pretty good. All right, questions from anyone? We've got about 10 minutes for questions, and then we'll close things up and mingle.
Yes, questions, guys? Just raise your hand. Is this on? Yes, it is. We'll collect maybe 3 and then pitch it to the panelists. I see one over here, and I don't know if this will reach. It should. You think? All right, we're gonna take this walk. Hi. Say your name and your question.
I'm Ellen Craig, and I'm on CALA's board. But my question is about climate change and the impact of climate change on inequality. It's quite likely, probable, to exacerbate inequality here and elsewhere in the world. So who might address that?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, the environmental injustice is real, and marginalized communities that are poor or outside the political process, or indigenous communities, however they are out of power, will be they will be disproportionately affected by climate change. As with pretty much every environmental problem in the world, those who have the least ability to resist and protect themselves will be disproportionately impacted. And that is absolutely true in the climate change impacts coastal people, fishermen, people who live near rivers in flood zones. You look at poor countries like Bangladesh, island nations. The poorer you are, the less resources you will have to mitigate the harms and be resilient. People in Bangladesh don't have resources to build seawalls and buy the pumps that are, everywhere in rich communities like Miami Beach. And even in, I've spent a lot of time in southern Florida recently looking at the climate change impacts there. And even in very wealthy communities like South Florida, like Miami, there, of course, are poor, immigrant, Black and brown communities. And right now, they don't live in the big fancy homes on the coasts. Do you know where they live? They live inside the city, 8 feet higher than those who live on the coast. And those who live on the coast are now moving inland. And we've got a situation of climate gentrification, where folks are losing their homes in what was previously, low income, not desirable property, but because it's 8 feet higher, they're getting pushed out. So the impacts are everywhere. They are here in the United States, and they are not far in the future. They are happening now.
Thank you for the question.
Thanks, Katie.
Anyone else?
We have one question back here. Any others that I should make my way over to? All right, we'll take a question from Scott.
Thanks. So I really, thank you to each of you. I really enjoyed hearing this. I'm a lawyer too, and it was just really inspiring, wonderful to hear. The question builds off of something that Katie, you shared about when you lost, and yet the impact that you still had. I think so often when you think about using law as an instrument of change, there's sort of this like cinematic version where you win, and then there's these sort of awkward high fives on the courthouse steps and all that. But in fact, just sometimes bringing, a complaint and, entering that conversation, getting into, sort of the risk management profiles of large corporations can have this incredible and very important effect. So I'm wondering if you could kind of differentiate a little bit from, sort of the goals or the outcomes, and then just sort of the impact you can have just by, existing and being there and doing this. Because the thing I kept coming back to when y'all were talking was, something, Justice Jackson said at the Nuremberg trials, about this being something, the greatest tribute that power has ever played to reason. And, to me, what always attracted me to law from a sort of social change standpoint wasn't so much the power you could wield, but the way you could use things like sort of intelligent, thoughtful, fact-based argument to leverage your position and produce an outcome. And so I know totally not something they make a movie about, but curious about how that features in your work and how you think about those things.
And then I'm also going to chime in with a question we have from online, which is, how are big law firms reacting to the tactics each of you are using? Have they changed their strategies or approaches at all, or have they engaged directly with you?
So actually, I wanted to speak to the question of loss, because I actually think that in movement building, a loss is often more effective than a victory. If you can bring exposure to how wrong the law is or how wrong the situation is, you can actually move more people and mobilize more people than, oh, we won. And so people think the issue is over with. And right now, one of the challenges that we face is you see a lot of victories because in courts, because lots of organizations are rightfully fighting a lot of these terrible policies. And we're getting a lot of victories, but that victory those victories sometimes come at a cost because it's not really fully exposing how wrong the system itself actually is. And so a lot of times we take on cases we know we're going to lose at the instruction of organizers and activists because they need that loss to say, this is how fucked up, pardon my language.
Technical legal term.
Very, very, very critical community lawyering term. This is how messed up the legal system is, or this is how messed up this law is. Is this right that this can happen?
Yeah, I'll just chime in and say that that there are so many benefits along the way before you get to victory or loss that are so important to be able to work towards. And I mean, on that point, we work with lawyers in Cambodia who are filing one case after another that they know they're going to lose every single one, and their point is to show that the system is broken. Because they're getting hundreds of millions of dollars from governments, for their reconstruction following the genocide, for rule of law and judicial training, and yet not one single case on behalf of villagers for land rights can ever be won. And then, you can win by exposing the truth. Long before you get to trial, you're in discovery. And we all know what happened in the tobacco litigation when we found out what they knew and when they knew it and how they covered it up. Well, guess what? we're finding out in the climate change litigation. We're finding out that they knew that climate change was real and that it was posed an existential threat to our planet and that their product caused it in 1968, 50 years ago. And then they developed a strategy to lie about it, cover it up, confuse the public to keep selling their product. So that was a victory. That's a victory to find things out. And you have an entirely different way of winning, and I think it's awesome. She wins way more than we do.
The business owners I serve, the farmers win.
Right.
But I'm happy when they're happy, when they have a solution that works for them and that represents the values that they hold for their business and their community. But I did want to answer that question about large law firms, because it might be especially relevant in the transactional business law context. So right now, Farm Commons serves a market that is not using attorneys. And so I think big firms are fine with what we do. However, it is our goal to transform what the practice of business law really means in the United States and to make it centered on the experience and the solutions and the communities that small business owners come from. So change is hard. There's often resistance to change. And what I anticipate is being in dialogue with traditional practitioners and large law firms about the potential for change to be positive. There are many attorneys that aren't very happy with their quality of life and anticipated that they would be serving their communities in a more tangible way by becoming an attorney. The model we offer offers that quality of life, offers a rich experience to be in dialogue with creative people and to create authentic solutions that I think will be really attractive to people who got into law to serve their community in the first place. So I am hopeful that the alternative that we're building, the more empowering model, will convert folks that want to serve their communities and right now are trapped into this conventional way of practicing business law.
One more question, Annie, or are we?
We have one more question from online. And I'm going to paraphrase it because it's a good question. But looking towards the future, you guys have mentioned what law school does and doesn't do. So for prospective attorneys, people thinking about following this journey, what should law schools be doing differently? What should law students be learning? How do you hope the next generation of lawyers is educated?
Of rabble-rousing lawyers, as you guys called yourselves earlier.
Yeah.
Not just regular lawyers.
Yes, that is a great question. Are you looking at me?
Do you want to start?
You can go.
Okay.
Take it away.
So for us, our young lawyers, and actually, in some ways, our more senior attorneys who've been practicing in legal aid require more deconstruction. So what we would really hope with law schools is for, law schools in classrooms, and it can't be in classrooms. Let me put some context. If you're going to law school, if law school sees itself in the business of social change, then it can't be in the classrooms. And law schools are way too much all about what's in books, what's in the courtrooms. And there's also a mythology around legal education and the law that I think has to be changed. I'm sure most of you have heard of this really great myth that Brown versus the Board of Education, that seminal case that changed and desegregated schools. The reality was, it wasn't the Supreme Court that created the victory. The Supreme Court really was just, they rubber stamped all of the work that had been done on a grassroots level by activists to say schools cannot be segregated. And then worse off, if you look at the history of it, schools became actually more segregated after Brown versus the Board of Education. Law schools need to be more realistic and really teach what the limitations of the law is. And I would say that for me was the most important lesson that I didn't learn in law school, but I should have, which is the law is limited, and if we want social change, it's about what you can do with the law outside of it that is the most important, and those are the skills that you have to acquire.
Yeah, I'll echo what you say. I mean, the legal education is based on reading cases and reading decisions written by judges about legal minutia. And rarely do you read something in a law school textbook that tells you the story of what happened. Who were the clients? Who were the plaintiffs? Who were the defendants? What did they do? And what happened to them? And so law students often graduate with like this highly technical legal education that is completely separated from the living, breathing human beings, or the rivers and the forests that you went to law school to protect and advocate for in the first place. And so I think that actually being in the communities, getting out into the field and working on real cases, I feel like textbooks should be rewritten to include that. There's this great series of books called, fill in the blank, stories. So you have tax law stories, believe it or not, and it actually tells the story of the tax law case. I wrote a chapter in a book called Human Rights Law Stories, which wasn't about what the judge wrote, it was about what happened to our clients. And so that would be a transformational change. I also think a full-on deep discussion of what is justice, because you come out of law school thinking justice is if you won the case. And we've all experienced that, winning the case might not actually be justice for your clients or make any real change. And finally, the first thing that we teach young lawyers when they come work at Earthrights is how to listen. No, seriously, you are taught a very specific kind of listening in law school, which is listening to parse, listening to argue, listening to either support your argument or beat down theirs, as opposed to what we all need to do, which is listen to understand.
With humility.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes to the listening over and over. Folks, law school students need to learn how to listen to business owners and what they're asking for and what they want and what risk means to them. And one more thing, law school debt. Law school debt is a real barrier to a small business practice. Rural America is suffering from a huge lack of attorneys across the United States. The state of South Dakota will pay an attorney to please come and serve their communities because you can't make enough money doing it. And if you have $200,000 worth of law school debt, how can you pay it back? We need a solution to that.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Lam, Katie, Rachel, for such an engaging conversation. Thank you all for coming. Do check out the other conversations that we'll be having over the next several months on the Ashoka US website and also on social media. We'll be in Raleigh, Durham, and Miami, and Colorado. It's part of our effort to push beyond the traditional sort of coastal bubbles of social entrepreneurship and support and highlight change makers that reflect the full, rich diversity of this country and of the lived experience in the United States. And our closing call to action to all of you here is to help us spot people like the three here on stage, which is not easy, but it's a fun challenge, as we try to grow the Ashoka Fellow Network over the next 4 or 5 years. Help connect us to sources of funding that can help grow this work and grow their work, and help us tell these stories and get these solutions out there, because there's as you can tell, there's a lot here, and I think it's past due for Ashoka and our fellows to no longer be the country's best kept secret. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you again.
And for folks in the room, our final call to action is come hang out with us. The evening is not over. The panel